looking at her, that she had incredible strength, so a purebred vampire is not an easy opponent for him. He crashed into the barrier, and was surprised by this. Over asked, did he really think that he could easily escape from here? The best blood mages of her clan set up a barrier. The protagonist thought, touching the barrier with his hand, that he could break through it, but he would have to try hard for it. However, he needed more time to get used to his new power. She said, using blood magic, that she would be able to cut his skull, and then personally extract the fragment from it. Sung Hyun thought that then there was only one option. The protagonist said, grinning, that she should remember this, he is from the oath of disobedience. And he is her death. He can retreat, but next time he will definitely come back for her. He thought that this is the trademark of a villain, always leaving dramatically. The protagonist used his ability to call Hans back from there. The subordinate of the pure-blooded vampire asked why he said that. The servant who raised his hand said that it was very inappropriate. Over screamed, looking at him in surprise, how did he get through the barrier? Suddenly, one of the servants was killed from behind by an arrow. She said, looking anxiously, that these were the holy silver arrows of the paladins. The subordinate shouted, pointing his index finger to the side, that they had a big problem. The paladins of the Order of the Church of the Supreme God have arrived here. They have already surrounded the tomb and are approaching them. Overthought, speaking rudely and angrily clenching her teeth, that she was cursing this lich. Was this why he stayed in the city and delayed them here? He was too cunning, so wherever he was, she had to find him. She angrily shouted that she would definitely be able to find him and kill him. After a while, in the protagonist's room, Sung Hyun said, sighing in relief, that he was still alive. Hans said that recall is a cheat code, and he was convinced of it. Sung Hyun shamefully recalled what he said before using the ability, recall. He asked, swinging his legs on the bed, why did he use a typical line from the villain's dialogue? He will die of shame like that. The protagonist asked, clutching his face with his hands, why did he even say that? Was he crazy? He asked, using the personality of Hans, was he really proud of his strength? He said that he managed to deal with a group of evil vampires. And he also managed to save a defenseless girl and her brother, and an entire city. Sung Hyun said with a smile that now after saying that, he feels like a hero. He asked while stretching, now he should have earned himself karma, right? The protagonist said that he was calling Karma Shop. He stared at the system window in surprise. A system window popped up with information that his Karma Shop balance was 731,002 points. Sung Hyun asked in shock, how did he already have more than 700,000 points? After all, he had already spent everything on upgrading. Why were there so many points again? He asked with a nervous smile. Was it because he managed to enrage the vampires and dark mages, so that was why it affected his karma so much? The protagonist said, pressing the system window, that he could figure it out later. But for now, should he improve the special skill again? A system window popped up with information that his limit on summoning avatars had been increased. He said, smiling, that the number of avatars had now been increased for him. However, were there any other additional skills? The system window notified that he had acquired the special skill, Persona. Sung Hyun said, happily looking at the system window, that this was what he was counting on. Was the skill, Persona, similar to the skill, Mind Center? He should check it out. Then he thought that the special skill, Persona, uses the avatar as a vessel for emotions. The growth of the special skill occurs in the direction the user needs. The system determined what he needed now. Now he understands why he needs this. He established connections with strangers and helped defeat strong enemies. However, he sat in his room for 2 years. And the reason he was able to do all this is because for him, what was happening there was just a game. But in reality, he still has to sit locked in his room there. So the reality he had been avoiding all along is now right in front of him. The loneliness, sadness, and anger he had to suppress, as well as other accumulated negative emotions. He said to Hans that he needed to transfer these terrible emotions into a vessel. The protagonist thought, is this so refreshing? However, he does not feel the emotions disappear. It was as if they had just been neatly placed in a box. Now he wondered how Hans was feeling, who had absorbed his negative emotions. Hans said that he shouldn't worry about it. He said, covering himself with dark energy, that pain and despair were his eternal companions, so they didn't bother him at all. Sung Hyun thought, looking at him in surprise, that this couldn't be true, although he had said it, but his tone had changed. Hans said, laughing, that it had gotten through to him. An avatar who had been filled with emotions could now have its own personality? The protagonist wanted to express his thoughts, but suddenly there was a loud noise outside the window. He asked, "Was that an explosion? Why could this be happening now?" Sung Hyun asked, looking out the window, "Was there another villain? Was he there in the city now?" So things were getting worse every day. He said, holding his face in his hands, that he shouldn't worry about it now. Let the Guardians deal with it there. It's not happening right in front of him like last time. So it doesn't concern him at all. Hans asked if he needed a reason to eradicate evil. The protagonist thought, looking into his eyes, that after he transferred his negative emotions to Hans, everything became clear to him. Avoiding is his habit. Although he always wanted to defeat evil the most, he always made up excuses because he lacked the courage to do so. Hans said that the world order was shaken there. Criminals were everywhere there now. He said, using his power and wearing a mask, that he would now become their law. Some time later, at the site of the explosion, people were discussing the incident. They asked how many times had this happened there? The villains began to carry out terrorist attacks. Why haven't they called for reinforcements yet? Hans thought that the villains had created an organization there. They didn't have much time left. He would be ashamed to leave empty-handed. He used dark magic and created the Eye of Darkness. He thought it was time for them to be his eyes and ears in the darkness. After all, there were sinners hiding in the shadows. At that time, in the alley, some schoolchildren were making fun of their classmate. They said that they should bring him an ashtray. This was the ashtray man. The schoolboy laughed and held a cigarette to another schoolboy. They said that he was the best of all the ashtrays. The schoolboy who was being held down shouted that he begged them to stop. At that time, a woman asked, holding her child tightly, where they could run? A man with a drunken face shouted, swinging his belt, that she was deceiving him. At that time, a masked robber broke the window of the store and got inside. He said, opening the cash register, that this would be enough for him. Hans thought that he could see everything. Now he needed to punish the villains. They were no different from garbage. This punishment would be trauma, even a very stunning trauma. So he needed to instill fear in their souls. They are the seeds of evil that must remember this day. And when evil grows in them again, they will be met by darkness. Screams of horror were heard in the city. Hans thought that he was getting more and more used to the power. However, he needed more, much more. Because he needed to clean there more. He needed to clean this whole city of evil. After a while, Hans stretched tiredly and said that he had been cleaning out the garbage that was hidden in the darkness all night, and it felt good. He thought that the Eye of Darkness was quite useful, but its limitations were obvious. Under the influence of light, they weakened and disappeared. He needed a more effective way to detect enemies. However, he could not release the undead into the city. What should he do in this case? The protagonist shouted rudely that these birds had soiled his clothes. Maybe he should kill them all and make them his minions. He looked in surprise at the flying birds. Hans said that it was an invisible eye that could move freely around the city. And that was a very good idea. After a while, the protagonist thought that familiars are the enslavement magic used by dark magicians to control animals. Hans asked, surrounded by birds, why it didn't work for him. Sung Hyun thought that he had to try different ways to create a familiar, but so far he hadn't succeeded. Hans said that it would be great if they looked normal, but were infectious. However, if he reduced the amount of magic power to simplify the appearance, then its ability to infect would suffer. The protagonist thought that now he understood the complexity, and why programmers grit their teeth in debugging. Now he uses infectious enslavement magic, which is a revision of the final version of version number 3. He asked, did it work? A mutated cat jumped out of the cage, which disappointed him. Sung Hyun thought that after 3 weeks of research, he still did not have any significant result. He asked, clicking his tongue in displeasure and looking at the bird in the cage, is this the last one like this? So this time everything should work out. The protagonist said displeasedly, trying to hold the bird in his hands, let it freeze for at least a second. This time, he needs to better regulate the amount of magic power. He thought that he needs to use the contagious enslavement magic. This is now definitely a revision of the final version number 3. The protagonist said, sighing in relief that he finished doing this. He asked in surprise while the bird flew out of his hands, what does this mean? Sung Hyun thought that they now looked normal. So he only had to test the ability to infect. The infected bird landed next to the other birds and began to release dark energy. The protagonist thought that this was an excellent result, even a complete success. The infected objects become his eyes and ears there. He shouted, putting his hand in front of him, that it was time for them to move out. They must fly away. Sung Hyun thought that they would find enemies for him. At this time, not far away in the forest, Lacius knelt down and touched the ground. He remembered the words of the personality Hans, who used the skill, recall. Tuscan said, turning to him, that his knights had arrived. Lacius said, turning to him, that he was glad that they had finally arrived. Tuscan said irritably that after interrogating the remaining vampires, they captured them. However, they are not allies of the descendants of the immortal king. Lacius said that they needed more evidence. They have not dealt with it yet, although the immortal king is already gaining power. He used the magic on his cross to communicate and asked, addressing them politely, did they call him? The saint said, using magic to transmit information, that the presence of the immortal king was noticed among them. Currently, it is in a cave in the mountains northwest of this place. Lacius said, holding the cross in his hands, that he was grateful for this information, and he will definitely live up to their expectations. After some time in the cave, the protagonist thought that he had managed to set up his familiars to send information when encountering monsters. Now he had to check if the information was being received correctly. Strange things are happening here. The ground familiars are not acting as usual. Apparently, they are trying to escape from there. Are they scared? If they had discovered a monster, they would have immediately informed him about it, right? So it can only be people. They discovered people? Why are they in such a remote area? Does this mean an ambush for him? But this can't be. How can such a large number of people remain unnoticed and hide their presence? One of the familiars was suddenly shot. Tuscan said, addressing him, that he is a participant in the oath of disobedience. His pathetic tricks will not work on them. No evil can escape the sign of the saint. He will not be able to escape from here. He said, taking out his weapon, that he should surrender, and let him know divine justice. The protagonist thought that these were holy knights. He was familiar with this emblem from his training in Brokaslak. Divine power is opposed to dark magic, so it will not be easy for him to cope with it. Hans asked, turning to them, how did the servants of the church find him here? Tuscan struck him with his weapon and said that no one gave him the right to speak. He said, looking at him with irritation, that he should not think that he can deceive him with his words. The protagonist said that his enemy is too stubborn. He thought maybe he should deceive them and just run away. Tuscan said that such cheap tricks cannot defeat them. He said, using light magic, that he cannot deceive the servants of the saint. The protagonist was pierced with a weapon with light magic. He asked, did he really consider punishing villains a crime? Tuscan said, activating his light magic, that he had better shut up. From the moment his mind was mired in the forbidden power, he became one of the villains. Sung Hyun asked, activating his dark magic, where is the logic in this? He thought that since something unpleasant interfered with my magic recently, he has become weak. The protagonist was thrown aside by the blow. Tuscan shouted that they should start singing the anthem. He lured him out. Sung Hyun thought, clutching his head, that their anthem was draining his strength. He could kill them and shut them up, but he hated the idea of hurting innocent people. Tuscan shouted, standing next to him, that the singers should not stop. The protagonist was stabbed from behind with a weapon. He said that this was their chance to win. Let them calm him down. Sung Hyun thought that this was not good. He was too careless. He thought, chained up in chains, that he was in danger now. He couldn't move or use magic, because these chains wouldn't even let him escape from here. The protagonist said that they had done a good job of catching him. Tuscan said that this was exactly what he expected. No evil had ever escaped from these chains. He wouldn't resist anymore? The protagonist said, grinning, as if he wanted this. It was obvious to him that it was impossible to come to an agreement with them. They would part ways here. Let them catch him if they could, they were just lackeys of the church. Tuscan said while activating light magic that he didn't know what exactly his enemy was planning. He asked while attacking him, he didn't think about how he would just stand there, did he? The protagonist thought with a smirk that it was all useless. It didn't matter how strong these chains were, because Hans was already free. Tuscan asked in surprise, did he manage to break free from the chains? This couldn't happen. He thought, who the hell is he? Sung Hyun said tiredly while lying on the bed that this was already becoming a problem for him. He thought that he had too many enemies out there. Could it be that wherever he went, he could only create chaos? First, the Shadow faction. Oath of defiance. Then the vampire clan Varkalak, and now one of the continent's biggest powers, the Paladin Order, have become his enemies. He suddenly remembered one important thing. The protagonist had called up the system window with the karma store. Sung Hyun thought that there was a reason why he had been earning karma until today. Don't tell him. Everything is not just like that, and this is happening to him because he attracts villains from all over the continent. He said with a heavy sigh that it would be better for him to think about it later. For now,